Hello everyone, my name is Laura, this is my channel Laura's Little Library, and welcome to today's video, which are my beginner intro to spicy romantasy books. So recently I had a friend of mine who is getting into romantasy as a genre and is starting to experiment, and none of the books that I said were books that they had recognized, and the books that they were reading did not, they wanted to learn more or read more of the genre. So I thought I'll just make a video of some of my favorite romantasy books, some of my recommendations, some just kind of classics in the romantasy genre, things that I think everybody should try if they're interested in romantasy, or these are just kind of the staple titles in modern romantasy books. But first, let's talk about romantasy as the genre. So romantasy, I feel like, has really become a very strong genre recently in the past like 5 to 10 years. I don't really know how long I've been reading, but I've been reading longer than that, but I feel like, at least for me personally, romantasy has really blossomed into a popular genre or subgenre in the past 5 to 10 years. So I would say that romantasy is like, obviously it's fantasy and romance merged into one, and I think a lot of what can be covered under this are romance books where the fantasy elements are pivotal, as in you can't just take this book and turn it into a contemporary, because if you can do that, it's more just a romance with fantasy elements. There needs to be some sort of underlying plot for there to be fantasy, and vice versa with the romance. It's not just a pure fantasy book with a very small, minimal romance plot. Like, the romance plot has to be a large part of the book. Not all of them are always balanced, or a lot of times both are just as important to the book or the series, and that's why it's romantasy. It is fantasy with strong romance, whether the romance is pivotal or whatever. So, like I said, I'm gonna go through some of the ones I feel like are probably the most well-read, most common, or pivotal within the genre. These are all ones that I recommend, that I've read and loved. This is not a comprehensive list. In fact, this is quite a short list of romantasy. It's just kind of the highlights of my shelf when it comes to the genre, because I feel like a lot of really good, or at least for me, a lot of really good romantasy is also quite dark in some way. So I will be going through those. If you want a non-spicy or a lighter one, because things like Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, or even I would argue The Cruel Prince, could be considered romantasy, but not like dark or spicy or super heavy. And some of those, it's more of slow burn romance, where it's still very pivotal to the series, but the first book is like a fantasy and the second and third are like the building into the romance. So if you want a video that's like not very spicy or like kind of lighter on the romantasy genre, I can definitely make that. But for now, most of these are pretty dark and spicy, so let's get into it. First up is Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco. Kerri Maniscalco has written another series that is not romantasy, and I loved those, but the first one is YA, and then the ones after it are adult, and pretty much every book she has written after has been very adult, and they're all very romantasy, because you have these magical elements of the demons having characters and personalities and things like that, and there's magic between going to the realms of the seven sins and things like that, but it is very much all about kind of the romance. Like, our main character has the mission, her sister is dead, and so she accidentally, kind of intentionally, summons a demon in order to help her solve her sister's murder, and it's enemies to lovers, and she ends up summoning a prince of sin instead of just any old demon. So this is a trilogy, and then there are books that take place in this universe afterwards that are extremely spicy fantasy, dark fantasy books. So if you have not read Kerri Maniscalco, or you're just getting into the genre and you know you can handle spice, this is a great place to start. Another completed trilogy that I would recommend, and it's not quite as spicy as Kerri Maniscalco, but it does have a very strong romance presence, and that would be Serpent and Dove, and this is by Shelby Mahurin. Not everybody liked how this trilogy ended, so just keep that in mind if you need to have a strong ending or you will be disappointed. Maybe I'll look into this a little bit more, but this is your classic. You have a witch and a witch hunter, and they get paired up in order to follow the plot line, kind of, you know, she gets captured, she has to help him, but she's incredibly sarcastic and just, you know, doesn't like being in the situation that she's in, and he doesn't really much like it either. So it's another one of those like enemies to lovers, dark. This has a lot more of the romantasy humor of a lot of banter back and forth, and you've got your good boy and your bad girl, and that's the thing. My number one thing about this trilogy was the banter between the characters. Another author that I would recommend, I'm going to hold up the first book in her first duology, but she is currently about to finish a trilogy as well, and so either duology or trilogy from this author falls very nicely into the romantasy subgenre, and that is anything by Hannah Witten. So this is For the Wolf. The first one is called For the Wolf, the second one is For the Throne, and like I said, she has another trilogy where the third book is coming out this year, so make sure you stay tuned for my anticipated reads part 2 video coming out very soon. This is much more of like your fairy tale retelling kind of romantasy, which in itself could be a whole other subgenre, I think. But this is a little bit of Little Red Riding Hood. You've got a kingdom with a mysterious woods that nobody can really enter in. It's not safe, it's dark, etc. and so forth. And you have 2 daughters in the royal family. One is called For the Wolf, and then the other is meant for the throne. So the first one, she is meant to be a sacrifice to appease the beast in the woods so that the kingdom is safe. And then the other daughter is meant for the throne. So you follow her as she kind of journeys through the woods to become a sacrifice to this beast, except things are not quite as they seem, and the beast might be not quite as hairy as you would think. I loved this book. I devoured it in a day, and then when the second book came out, I read that one extremely quickly, and I loved the trilogy. So I really loved this, so give this one a try. Next up is another duology, and this one is completed as well, and that is This Vicious Grace, and this is by Emily Feed. So this is a duology that is kind of taking place in an alternate Italy it is a fantasy world where some people have like a special power to it, and there's one called the Finestra, and the Finestra, she cannot touch other people. She can't, or she will kill them. They will die. So she has to find somebody that she can touch who survives, because that person is supposed to be the amplifier for her power, and she needs to find that person because at a specific time that is preset by the gods, there will be an attack of like a bunch of monsters and demons, and she has the power to defeat them and save the world from ruin. And this is something that happens like, what was that, every 7 years or so? Like it's continual. So she needs to find somebody that she does not kill in order to become powerful enough to destroy all the demons. And lo and behold, she ends up getting this bodyguard to protect her because everybody is so fearful of all the people that she's killed, and they want her gone. They don't want to deal with her. So she ends up getting a bodyguard who is supposed to protect her while she searches for this person that is supposed to help her like win the war on the demons. And I will say this is one of those rare duologies where I loved the first book, but then I loved the second book just as much. It really kept me going through, and the romance is a very pivotal point, and that's really what carries you from the first book to the second book is the romance. Even though obviously it's a very strong fantasy world with its own plot line. So I think this is like the epitome of romantasy, but this is also not very spicy. In a similar vein in terms of amount of spice and importance of romance versus fantasy is the next trilogy, the Belladonna trilogy by Adeline Grace. So like I said, this is a trilogy. It is completed, although we are getting like a little novella accompaniment to be book number 3.5 soon. Again, I mentioned it in my anticipated reads, but this follows our main character who is an orphan, and she actually comes from a family with a ton of wealth, but she keeps getting bounced around from cousin to cousin, family member to family member, somebody to take care of her until she's of age, and everybody wants her because she's super rich and they want her money, but she refuses to die. In that everyone else around her dies, but she does not. And she even eats like belladonna berries, and instead of dying, she gets to have a chat with death. So again, this is very much like a dark fantasy because it's all about death and things like that and people betraying just to get money. But it's the romance between the first book and the second book, and then another romance between the second and the third, that is really what carries and strings the series along together as people are figuring out who they are, why they are, how they are, etc. and so forth. And again, I really enjoyed it. It's not spicy, it's not very spicy, definitely not in the beginning, but I would still consider this romantasy. Next up is another one of my favorite authors. This one is another duology, but it's more like their companion novels as opposed to having to read one before the other, but I'd still recommend this one first, and that is The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. This is a very interesting romantasy. First off, it's short. All these other ones are like fairly long novel based, you know, like anywhere from 400 to 600 pages or whatever. This is quite a bit smaller, and the plot is a little bit, I don't know, because you've got this fantasy world and the ruler of it has like shadows at his disposal, and he is supposed to take a bride to, you know, keep the family line going in order to keep ruling the kingdom. And our female main character, who we follow, has every intention of being his wife, but as a means to then kill him, as a means to further her own agenda. She's not interested in romance and love and actually courting, but she is also a very progressive woman, a very strong feminine figure, and is very comfortable with her own sexuality and things like that. So it is definitely a unique one to put in the romantasy, because everything else, you know, is like enemies to lovers, which I mean, yeah, this kind of is, but you don't really know that because she's still trying to like woo him to a certain degree. But like where fate pushes them together and they're not supposed to fall in love, but they were supposed to complete this mission. No, her mission is him and is to kill him. So it has a different feeling than a lot of books that are typical for this genre, but it's still really good and still fits the genre. And this is much spicier. I would be remiss if I do not mention this series. Again, I think it is one that is quite pivotal in, I'm using the word pivotal a lot. I think this is one that has a very strong stake in the game in terms of being some of the best romantasy. Some people may disagree with me. The series is also not completed yet, but what can you do, right? That is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I would definitely classify this as a romantasy, but leaning a little bit more on the fantasy side. But because book 3 out of 5 is out, things can change. You never really know. So if you are unfamiliar with this book, this is a book about a dragon war college. Basically, there's a nation that is at war with another nation, and it is incredibly difficult to become a dragon rider, but if you do pass the test to even like physically get into the school, if you cross the parapet, then you go through a rigorous training and process to try and be selected by a dragon in order to become a dragon rider. So our main character was actually supposed to become a scribe. She's incredibly smart, and her body is not one that people would push to be trained as a physical warrior, soldier, dragon rider. And yet somehow she ends up crossing that parapet. Nobody saw it coming. She wasn't even planning on it. She was going to be a scribe, but now it looks like she might become a dragon rider. And this is like the definition of the dark and brooding love interest that just like makes you just ooh when you read it. So yeah, if you're unfamiliar with this, now hopefully you are a little bit more familiar and you're inclined to pick this up if you're interested in getting into the romantasy genre. The final book that I'm going to talk about is just another author in general. I'm holding up a book for the sake of holding up a book, but really anything by this author, and this video would not be complete without mentioning this author, and that is really anything by Sarah J. Maas. I'm holding up Throne of Glass because this is the first book that was written for this series, which is, I think, her first one, or it's the one that everybody starts with. There is a prequel to this called The Assassin's Blade that is written after this series, but takes place before the series. It's the background on this character here on the cover, right? So I'm currently still reading the series, which I know it's taken me forever to read this, but a lot of her books have strong romance subplots in them. I am still kind of teetering on the verge of, is it romantasy or is it just fantasy with romance subplots? But I think her other series, ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses, is probably more romantasy than Throne of Glass. This is just the one that I'm reading, but I also feel like it is one that everybody uses as the basic introduction. Like, you're not a romantasy reader unless you read ACOTAR or Sarah J. Maas. So I have to hold this up. I have to talk about it. So here it is. Those are just a few of my favorites of romantasy on this shelf. Like I said, this is mostly just to get you familiar with some of the really common popular romantasy books so that you get a really strong understanding of the genre. And then you can decide if you like it or not, if you want to keep reading or not. But I love reading it. And there are so many, like I said, so many other good romantasy books. And it has become probably my most read genre, or is rapidly becoming my most read genre, because anything that is in a fantasy world with romance, I'm probably going to enjoy it as long as it's well written with good plot and decent characters. So, but yeah, those are just a few to get you started if you're new. Thank you all very much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Comment down below if you feel there are any books, series, authors that you think I missed and should be included in your basic Romantasy 101 video or guide to the genre. And again, if you want a part 2 of this, of either more spicy or less spicy, kind of a lighter romantasy, something that's not as dark, let me know in the comments below. If you like bookish content like this, feel free to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified. I am posting videos every week, and I also have bookish social media linked in the description below that you can follow me on, like my Bookstagram and things like that, to keep up with what I am reading. Again, thank you all very much for watching, and until I see you in the next video, I wish you happy reading.